Autumn in the Kanto Plains of Japan is not a season that yields easily to expectation. Mist drifts across the low hills, clinging to the rice paddies like a living veil. The air carries the damp scent of earth and the distant smoke of villages preparing for winter. It is in this quiet, deceptively still landscape that the fate of an entire nation teeters on the edge of a blade. The year is 1600. Japan has endured decades of fractured rule, a mosaic of daimyo territories vying for supremacy. The Sengoku period, a century of near-constant warfare, has forged a generation of warriors, hardened in the crucible of siege and skirmish. Yet, despite the wars that have raged across the archipelago, none of the campaigns in living memory have carried a weight that now presses down upon the western provinces. A single battle here, in these low, rolling hills, will decide the balance of power for the next century. On one side stands Ishida Mitsunari, a man of intellect and calculation, commanding a coalition of loyalists to the Toyotomi regime. His forces are numerous, well-equipped, and strategically positioned to confront Tokugawa Ieyasu, whose reputation as a brilliant tactician and patient schemer has grown steadily with each campaign. Mitsunari's army moves cautiously, aware that hesitation could be fatal, but also acutely conscious of its own numerical advantage. Yet numbers alone cannot secure victory, particularly in terrain that can be manipulated by the smallest, most disciplined force. Across the plains, Tokugawa's forces stretch toward the horizon. He commands fewer men in this theater, approximately 30,000, but each unit is trained, tested, and most crucially, strategically positioned to exploit the weaknesses of his opponents. Tokugawa understands the landscape better than any general before him. Narrow valleys, treelines, and hillocks can all become instruments of deception, capable of transforming a numerical disadvantage into a decisive tactical edge. The stage is set not only by geography, but by years of political maneuvering. In the months preceding the confrontation, alliances have shifted, betrayals have simmered, and loyalties have been tested. Many daimyo outwardly pledged support to Ishida, yet in the shadows, clandestine agreements whisper of allegiance to Tokugawa. The battlefield is as much a theater of politics as it is of steel and gunpowder. For a commander, each message received, each feigned advance, carries the weight of life or death. Decisions cannot be reversed once the first volley of musket fire cracks the calm. It is within this framework of uncertainty that a smaller, specialized contingent emerges. 3,000 samurai handpicked for their discipline, loyalty, and ability to operate in isolation. They are assigned a task that could reshape the battle entirely. To execute an ambush, to strike not at the strongest line, but at the seam where fear, hesitation, and overconfidence intersect. These men are acutely aware of the risk. To falter would mean annihilation. To succeed could tilt the scales irreversibly in Tokugawa's favor. In the days leading up to the engagement, scouts traverse the hills and valleys, returning with reports that are interpreted with meticulous care. Paths that appear inconsequential on a map may hide marshes, traps, or concealed units. Wind direction, the angle of sunlight, the moisture of the soil, all these factors are recorded, studied, and incorporated into the plan. Samurai commanders convene quietly, not in the flash of ceremonial grandeur, but in the intimate shadows of temporary encampments, discussing lines of attack, contingencies, and fallback positions. Every arrow drawn, every matchlock aligned, is measured against the likelihood of success. The psychology of the battlefield begins long before the first clash of swords. Soldiers, even those who have faced dozens of skirmishes, sense the anxiety that emanates from their leaders. In the Toyotomi ranks, Mitsunari projects confidence, but undercurrents of doubt ripple through his commanders. Reports of potential defections, poorly coordinated scouting, and the uncertainty of terrain create a pressure that cannot be solved with mere numbers. On the Tokugawa side, discipline and clear chain of command instill a cautious optimism. They trust not only the strategy, but the environment itself to act as an ally. On the morning of the battle, the plains awaken under a thin veil of mist. Horses paw the ground nervously, and the distant sound of drums from the Toyotomi camp carries faintly across the hills. The first light of dawn reflects off the samurai armor, dull steel catching the sun like a glimmering promise of precision. The 3,000 men designated for the ambush take their positions quietly, concealed in depressions, behind hedgerows, and within small wooded patches. Their mission is surgical. to disrupt the flow of the larger force, create panic in critical sectors, and then withdraw before the enemy can consolidate. Mitsunari's army advances, confident in its size, unaware that the landscape has been turned into a trap. Tokugawa has intentionally allowed gaps and choke points to appear inviting, calculated to guide the enemy into corridors where numbers count for nothing. It is a psychological warfare, as much as a tactical one. Each step the Toyotomi soldiers take is now a movement through a minefield of anticipation and discipline, though they do not yet realize it. At the same time, communication across the battlefield is chaotic. Flags flutter, messengers ride back and forth. The clash of steel and the occasional flash of early firearms punctuate the morning air. Leaders must make decisions in fractions of moments, weighing incomplete information against instinct and training. For Mitsunari, hesitation carries the risk of losing initiative. For Tokugawa, patience is an instrument of power. By allowing the enemy to advance into prepared positions, he magnifies the effectiveness of his smaller contingent, turning geography into a force multiplier. Every unit has its assigned role. Every samurai knows the signal that will trigger their attack. This coordination is the product of months of preparation, but in the heat of potential engagement, even the most disciplined soldier faces internal tension. Fear, excitement, and the primal instinct to survive compete with training. The ability to act decisively despite these pressures often defines not just a battle, but a warrior's survival. By mid-morning, the first subtle signs of engagement begin. Forward Toyotomi scouts encounter minor resistance, small skirmishing units positioned to test reactions. These are not the main assault. They are probes designed to gauge the enemy's response. Tokugawa's forces observe carefully, withdrawing in a controlled manner to lure the attackers deeper into prepared terrain. From the perspective of the advancing Toyotomi troops, the battlefield seems manageable. Their attention is focused forward, not yet noticing the pattern of concealment and controlled exposure designed to isolate and paralyze their formations. The calm tension stretches across hours. The mist thickens in low-lying areas, softening sounds and making distance deceptive. Leadership decisions, whispered over maps and verbal reports, now become the silent heartbeat of the battlefield. Each adjustment in position, each command to advance or hold, ripples through the ranks. Soldiers begin to sense something unusual, a pattern too disciplined for mere coincidence, a gap that feels inviting but carries a hidden threat. In these opening moments, the seeds of collapse are sown not by combat, but by psychological pressure. Commanders face the first real test of judgment under uncertainty. Every hesitation is observed, every misstep magnified. The narrative of the battlefield is being written not with blood yet, but with the careful orchestration of presence, positioning, and anticipation. By the time the first engagement occurs in earnest, the Toyotomi forces have moved into a corridor meticulously prepared for the ambush. It is narrow, flanked by small wooded hills, and bordered by marshy fields that restrict maneuverability. The 3,000 samurai lie in wait, muscles coiled, eyes scanning for precise moment. This is a culmination of every calculation, every scout report, and every discussion about terrain and psychology. In this space, numerical superiority counts for nothing. The battlefield itself has been transformed into an instrument of strategy, capable of turning thousands into a liability. And so, as the sun rises higher, Tokugawa's plan begins to take shape. The stage has been set for a confrontation that will test not only the skill of warriors, but the discipline of leaders. What follows is a delicate, perilous unfolding of an ambush so meticulously executed that it will enter the annals of history as a study in tactical brilliance. The battlefield in the Kanto Plains reveals itself fully as the mist begins to lift. What appeared from a distance as a broad, open expanse is, upon closer inspection, a complex lattice of hills, streams, and marshes. Every contour of the land has meaning. Tokugawa Ieyasu, aware that terrain can compensate for inferior numbers, has carefully studied this landscape for weeks. Hills that appear benign to an advancing army conceal narrow passes, ideal for ambush. Streams and low-lying wetlands restrict cavalry charges. Even the angle of the morning sun has been considered, used to blind scouts and mask movement in the undergrowth. Tokugawa's 3,000 elite samurai, hand-selected from his most disciplined regiments, occupy these positions. They are divided into small, autonomous units, each with a clear objective. Strike decisively, then withdraw along pre-planned routes to avoid encirclement. Each samurai is acutely aware of the stakes. Unlike a mass force, where cohesion can hide hesitation, here every moment demands precision. To falter is to invite annihilation. To hesitate is to risk the collapse of the entire operation. Opposing them, Ishida Mitsunari commands a force that is both formidable and diverse, roughly 30,000 men drawn from various domains loyal to the Toyotomi regime. This army includes experienced veterans who have survived sieges and skirmishes, as well as less seasoned conscripts pressed into service. The disparity in training and cohesion is already a hidden vulnerability. Large numbers can overwhelm through force, but only if maneuvering remains fluid and decision-making decisive. Mitsunari's challenge is to maintain cohesion while navigating terrain that subtly favors his smaller opponent. The composition of both armies dictates their approach. Tokugawa relies on disciplined infantry, archers, and strategically placed matchlock gunners. Each unit understands its role. Create zones of denial, channel enemy movements, and exploit overextensions. The samurai on the flanks, hidden in undergrowth or behind low ridges, serve both as observation posts and as the striking arm of the ambush. Communication is a combination of runners, subtle visual signals, and prearranged timing, allowing synchronized action without betraying position. Mitsunari's army, in contrast, is structured more traditionally. He places his largest contingents at the center, hoping to punch through Tokugawa's lines. Flanking units extend along the hills, but gaps exist between them. Unintentional, yet deadly in a battlefield shaped by concealment and deception. Commanders attempt to maintain visual contact across these gaps, but distance, mist, and the natural undulations of the land make coordination imperfect. Even minor delays in relaying orders have cascading consequences. The initial movements are cautious. Forward Toyotomi scouts probe, looking for weaknesses or signs of hidden troops. When they encounter minor resistance, small skirmishers holding ridges, they assume they've found the outer perimeter of Tokugawa's defenses. The samurai respond with controlled withdrawals, never committing fully, encouraging overconfidence. This is deliberate. The ambush is not a simple trap, but a psychological test. The Toyotomi forces are lured into the illusion of security. Horses and men advance along predictable routes, guided by terrain that favors a concealed 3,000. Narrow passes constrain formations, forcing the attackers into dense columns. Cavalry cannot maneuver freely, and the long spears and firearms of the Tokugawa forces become disproportionately effective. Every movement forward increases vulnerability. Soldiers at the front are unaware that behind each rise in the terrain, disciplined samurai lie poised, ready to strike. Tokugawa's commanders monitor the advance carefully. Signals, flags, hand gestures, even subtle movements of banners coordinate the hidden units. Timing is critical. A premature strike risks alerting the enemy. A delayed strike allows the columns to disperse, weakening the psychological impact. Precision, rather than brute force, dictates the tempo of engagement. As the Toyotomi columns move deeper into prepared corridors, tension builds. Commanders on both sides are acutely aware of the stakes. On the Toyotomi side, Mitsunari directs his units with an emphasis on speed, urging forward momentum, yet this very pressure exposes weaknesses. Soldiers press to advance rapidly over uncertain ground, experience anxiety and fatigue, reducing cohesion. On the Tokugawa side, patience reigns. Every report from scouts or intercepted messages reinforces the sense that the terrain itself is an ally, magnifying the effect of the smaller force. By mid-morning, first contact occurs. Samurai emerge from concealment along ridges, firing coordinated volleys of matchlock fire into flanks of advancing columns. Archers rain arrows into gaps in armor and formation. The effect is not catastrophic immediately. Rather, it is disruptive. Units hesitate, commanders reassess, and the sense of order begins to fray. Panic is not instantaneous, but the seeds of confusion are planted. Soldiers accustomed to direct engagement are now forced into reactionary combat, responding to threats that are not easily visible. The ambush is executed in phases. Frontline skirmishers maintain the illusion of weakness, drawing forward more troops. Then, Hitting units strike simultaneously at multiple points: flanks, rear columns, and vulnerable junctions between divisions. Sound and smoke add to the disorientation. Soldiers cannot easily discern the source of the attack, and with narrow terrain limiting maneuver, retreat is difficult. Confusion spreads faster than physical damage. Here, psychological pressure becomes as lethal as any weapon. Command and control begin to break down within the Toyotomi formations. Orders are delayed, misinterpreted, or impossible to execute due to terrain restrictions. Leaders try to restore coherence, face an impossible choice: push forward into a trap or retreat and risk fragmentation of their lines. Tokugawa's forces capitalize on this indecision. The samurai do not need to achieve a complete breakthrough. They simply need to maintain pressure, let chaos unfold, and prevent the enemy from consolidating. The intensity escalates as the ambush reaches its critical stage. Samurai on the flanks use spears and swords to engage directly, while those hidden in the undergrowth fire from concealment, creating the impression of an omnipresent enemy. Noise, smoke, and sudden movement amplify fear and uncertainty. Soldiers in the Toyotomi columns report attacks from multiple directions. The sensation of encirclement spreads even before the lines are physically surrounded. Discipline cracks, and small units begin to act independently, further weakening cohesion. Meanwhile, Tokugawa's commanders adjust dynamically. Observation posts signal shifts in enemy movement, prompting reinforcement of pressure points. Cavalry, held in reserve, exploit emerging gaps, striking with devastating precision. Each action is calculated to exacerbate confusion, not merely inflict casualties. By controlling where panic occurs, Tokugawa's forces ensure that Toyotomi soldiers lose the ability to coordinate, making numerical superiority irrelevant. Within hours, the initial probes and small skirmishes have transformed into a controlled collapse. The disciplined 3,000 samurai maintain cohesion, exploiting terrain and timing. Their actions create cascading effects. Soldiers hesitate. Leaders are forced to act under extreme stress, and the formation begins to fragment. Even the most experienced Toyotomi commanders struggle to maintain order. What was intended as a direct confrontation has been converted into a psychological battlefield, where perception, patience, and positioning dictate outcomes more than raw strength. By late morning, the first tangible signs of collapse appear in specific divisions. Units become isolated, pockets of resistance form, and the larger columns lose momentum. Tokugawa's forces, while smaller in number, maintain initiative and control. Each maneuver compounds confusion, driving the larger army toward disarray. What began as a disciplined advance now teeters on the brink of rout, but the battle is not yet won. Success hinges on whether Tokugawa can maintain pressure and exploit openings without overextending. In this critical phase, the battlefield exemplifies the brutal calculus of command under pressure. Leadership, terrain, and timing converge to amplify small advantages into decisive impact. Discipline is rewarded, hesitation punished. Every samurai understands their role, yet every moment carries the awareness of extreme risk. Victory is measured not just in kills, but in the precise orchestration of chaos, turning over confidence, size, and momentum into liabilities. The stage is set for the final, decisive moments. The ambush has achieved its primary goal: destabilization. The Toyotomi army, once a single, cohesive force, now fractures under psychological and tactical pressure. The 3,000 samurai, operating as a surgical instrument, have demonstrated how strategy, terrain, and discipline can outweigh overwhelming numbers. The culmination of these movements will determine not only the outcome of the battle, but the political future of Japan itself. By early afternoon, the battlefield has transformed from a theater of cautious maneuver into a stage of controlled chaos. The initial ambush, executed with meticulous precision, has begun to unravel the Toyotomi lines. What started as hesitation in a few divisions now spreads like wildfire. Units hesitate, leaders struggle to issue coherent commands, and gaps widen where cohesion once held firm. Tokugawa's smaller force, disciplined and strategically positioned, does not simply attack. It shapes the enemy's collapse with almost surgical intent. The turning point emerges not with dramatic fanfare, but with subtle, almost imperceptible shift in momentum. One of the Toyotomi flanks, pushed too far into a narrow valley, encounter sustained fire from concealed samurai units. The soldiers, compressed within the constrained terrain, cannot maneuver effectively. Commanders attempt to rally their men, but delayed orders and the relentless pressure of encroaching enemies amplify panic. In confined space, retreat becomes a deadly choice. Advancing only leads deeper into the trap. At the same time, Tokugawa's cavalry, held in reserve until now, executes a decisive intervention. Striking into exposed flanks, they break isolated columns and prevent regrouping. The effect is disproportionate to their numbers. A single, disciplined strike shatters morale across hundreds of enemy soldiers. Witnessing their comrades cut down or forced to flee, other divisions begin to falter. Fear, more than physical loss, now drives the behavior of Toyotomi forces. The battlefield is no longer a contest of tactics alone. It has become a psychological crucible. The 3,000 samurai who initiated the ambush continue their systematic engagement. They avoid overcommitment, maintaining mobility and discipline. Their focus is on disruption, not annihilation, forcing the larger army to make errors that compound in scale. Units that were once cohesive now act independently, attempting to secure escape or reinforce gaps that cannot be bridged. Commanders confront impossible choices: push forward and risk encirclement, or pull back and invite further chaos. In either case, Tokugawa's plan dictates the outcome. The psychological weight of the ambush becomes increasingly evident. Soldiers report attacks from multiple directions, smoke from firearms obscures vision, and the sound of clashing steel reverberates through the valleys and ridges. Human perception struggles under these conditions. The mind overestimates threat, misreads signals, and panics even in the absence of immediate danger. Tokugawa exploits this. His samurai manipulate visibility, maintain pressure without overexposing themselves, and time their strikes to maximize confusion. In the art of war, perception often outweighs reality, and here it proves decisive. As afternoon deepens, the Toyotomi army collapses into fragmented pockets. Groups of soldiers attempt to flee through terrain pre-selected by Tokugawa to channel movement. Marshy fields slow retreat, hills conceal additional forces, and the carefully orchestrated geography transforms flight into further disorganization. Resistance is localized but uncoordinated. Isolated skirmishes erupt and dissipate without affecting the broader battle. The illusion of control that Mitsunari's commanders once maintained has dissolved entirely. Ishida Mitsunari himself faces a crisis of command. Reports reach him of isolated units overwhelmed, flanks broken, and deserters appearing at unexpected points. Attempts to consolidate forces are hampered by the very terrain designed to impede coordination. Even with strategic insight, Mitsunari cannot reassert control over the sprawling, fractured formation. Every decision now carries the weight of desperation. Every order must compete with fear and confusion already gripping the ranks. By late afternoon, the collapse becomes total. The Toyotomi army, once an imposing 30,000, is reduced to scattered contingents fleeing or fighting in isolated skirmishes. Tokugawa's forces maintain cohesion and initiative, striking at critical points to prevent regrouping. The battlefield has inverted. The larger army is now a liability, its numbers working against it in terrain designed to amplify disarray. Casualties mount, but it is a psychological toll, the destruction of order and morale, that secures victory. The aftermath is as swift as it is decisive. Tokugawa consolidates control over key positions, ensuring that retreating forces cannot reassemble into a coherent threat. The surviving Toyotomi units, demoralized and leaderless, either surrender or escape in disarray. Tokugawa's smaller force suffers relatively minor losses, having leveraged terrain, discipline, and timing to achieve a victory that far exceeds expectations based on numbers alone. The 3,000 samurai who execute the ambush have demonstrated a principle that will resonate through military history, that strategic acumen and psychological control can outweigh sheer mass. This battle also reshapes the political landscape of Japan. The Toyotomi influence in the western provinces is effectively neutralized, and Tokugawa Ieyasu emerges as the preeminent power broker. The victory ensures a consolidation of power that will lead to the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, ushering in a century of relative stability known as the Edo period. The tactical brilliance displayed at Sekigahara becomes a benchmark for samurai warfare, illustrating the lethal interplay of terrain, timing, and disciplined execution.